For many of us, the last few years have had a serious lack of opportunities for arcade thrills, at least in trying to experience them in a physical sense. Even though things might be changing, there will always be a time when you might just need that quick fix to ease the doldrums between visits to your local. Which brings us to Icon 64's Arcade Daze, originally released as a perk in the 2021 Zap64 annual Kickstarter, before getting a wider release through Psytronik software. As local kid Eric, the goal is for you to top the score tables on all the games inside Arcade Daze, the best arcade in town. But it's not quite that simple. The arcade has 18 games installed, and in order to play one, you're first going to need to get some tokens. Those aren't something you can conjure out of thin air though. Instead, you're going to need to collect coins which you can convert into them. So, how do you get coins? Well, you need to scurry about the place, avoiding Kelly, the current queen of the arcade, and her cats Yin and Yang. She'll eventually drop coins, and you can collect them, and once you've got at least 10, you can trade them in for a token. And now you can get playing. By this point, I bet you're thinking it feels rather familiar. Well, you'd certainly be right, as it channels inspiration from Terminal Software's iconic Lazy Jones. There's quite a bit in common between the two, at least in the sense that you take charge of a character, you explore an environment, and you've got to play a bunch of mini-games in order to win. These similarities are best thought of as skin deep though. With Lazy Jones, the microgames you're tasked with playing are played against the clock. The goal is simply to play them and earn as many points as possible before time runs out. Or for those which do penalise you should you crash or die, trying not to die. When you've played a game, you're done with it until you move on to the next level. For Arcade Daze, there is only a single level, and in order to win the game, you've got to beat all of the games installed. Now, each of the games here offers a fairly simplistic winning condition, and should you fail, well, dust yourself off, metaphorically of course, and get another token and try again. Where Lazy Jones happens to run at a relatively brisk pace as our titular hero moves from game to game, Arcade Daze feels much slower in comparison. Having to pick up a set of coins before you can do anything really slows things down for me, especially with the unpredictable movements of Kelly as she's dropping coins about the place. I wish you had to actively do something to earn them and not just wait around for an unspecified time for them to drop onto the ground. But do things improve once you've earned enough coins to get some tokens? Well, mostly. Where each game in Lazy Jones was a unique twist on games of the time, Arcade Daze features 6. Unsurprisingly, these games are all based on arcade classics, whether you're craving some shooting action, with games taken from the likes of Space Invaders or Centipede, or you're up for mastering maze movements, like a Pac-Man style experience. Perhaps you got the itch to get some nondescript critters home, a la Frogger. Or you're a space hero, or want to be one, and want to save stranded astronauts, like in Lunar Rescue. Or maybe you've just got a general itch for blasting stuff whilst exploring mazes. You can consider these 6 the templates, and so 6 out of 18 certainly feels a little fewer than you might expect otherwise. Which is tackled in a not so surprising way. Creative reuse. Each of the base games has a number of variants on offer. These are both in visual style, but also in level of challenge. So, once you've plastered alien invaders, you might want to take on invading blimps, or worse, invading hot dogs. There's plenty of variety in the other games too, where instead of being not Pac-Man taking on not ghosts, you drive a car and avoid several giant tires and collect the dots they lay down. I guess it's a weird twist on that movie Rubber. Or perhaps instead of trying to get a frog-like thing over water, You can try and get an amoeba thing to its spaces while dealing with avoiding bugs and crossing over human waste, I think. I'm going to say this is quite a smart way to reuse things. Sure, I'd have loved to have seen more game types on offer, but you're always going to be limited by the mix of constraints. Whether it's memory of the host machine or development time, there's always a scope challenge out there. What would have been neat is something subtle to guide you as to which games were the easier variants, at least for a player starting out. As for these games though, I found them mostly pretty fun. I really got engrossed in a few as I tried to work my way through them. Obviously, the ones derived from Space Invaders did handle themselves well, and were pretty frantic as you dodge enemy shots and slowly whittle their numbers down. I also dug those of the Crib Centipede. Again, the game controls are tight and the overall spacing of the screen really made it frantic and a solid challenge at times. Of them all, the batch which channeled Pac-Man had the most unique twists to beat, whether it was having to eat enough dots which were dropped by the enemies in order to win, or dealing with some unique maze structures. It was certainly a nice twist on the formula, which carried over to those inspired by Lunar Rescue as well. The physics were a little off at first, but once you get the feel of it, there was a good challenge in learning the timing and tricks to navigate the formation of enemies standing between you and those poor astronauts. In fact, there were only 2 of the game styles on offer which I wasn't really a fan of. The Frogger ones were the first of these, particularly relying on character-by-character movement, meant lining up your creature to get in its hidey hole was not as precise as it perhaps should have been. Especially on the harder variants where things move quite a bit faster, giving you less opportunities to line things up and safely get your critter home. The other maze games were a bane as well, if only because of how imprecise it felt navigating them. The more frantic nature of these games over the not Pac-Man ones, where you're not just dodging enemies, but their fire as well, means reacting quickly and getting through a passageway is essential. But there's no leeway for rounding a corner, and so I found myself getting stuck on far too many occasions for my liking, ending my run prematurely, and meaning I'd have to go back and fetch more tokens. So in my time with Arcade Daze, I came relatively close to beating it, but the last few games were just a little too much for me, making me turn it off and not wanting to go the distance in the end. Its core is solid enough, and I'll admit, I wish there was more which could have been done with the mechanics and twisting them up for a better gradation of challenge, but it's certainly fun enough whilst it lasts. But in the long run, at least for me, there's not much which really drags me back. Part of that is in its scoring system, as because you need to win every game in order to win Arcade Daze, there's no motivation to go back for a high score because someone could easily beat you by grinding through and taking multiple attempts on games. It's also that there's little replay value as well. Once you beat a game, that's it. The next time you play, you've got nothing new to learn. All up, it really channels a modern budget release thing for me, and it's not that bad, as honestly, if you want to at least grab the digital download of it, it's pretty affordable and worth at least spending some time to check it out. Especially if you are in need of a hit of an arcade experience between visits to your preferred local. But before I sign off, there's not much else for me to say than the usual things. If you enjoyed the video, do hit that like button and, help the algorithm do its thing. If you enjoyed my chilled, thoughtful approach to looking at these games for vintage systems, then do consider subscribing and, yes, doing the notification bell thing. And if you want to help the channel survive a little more, niche channels do need a little more help out there and a little more support, consider signing up to the channel's Patreon feed, which there should be a card on screen for. Most importantly though, I just want to thank you for taking the time out to enjoy this episode.